Welcome to this conversation for Black History Month 2023. I'm so grateful to Rob Berkeley for sparing the time to do this with Chua. For those of you that don't know him, Rob is the co-director of Blackout, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise run and owned by a volunteer collective of Black gay men. And Blackout was shortlisted for a Chua Award last year, along with Couth and Culture's CIC. And I wanted to quote from your brilliant website, which says, "We're ambitious for ourselves and our communities, and ultimately seek to answer the call issued by Essex Hemphill in 1992 and create an organisation to save our lives." So I wondered if you could just tell us a bit more about yourself and your work with Blackout.
Oh, absolutely. So it's really good to be here, and actually I find Black History Month a really good moment to kind of take stock. So I think an organisation to save our lives. There's something really powerful about that poem. Essex Hemphill says, "The lives of Black men are priceless and deserve to be saved." And that just seems so counter to so much else that's going on around us that we thought, this is a kind of clarion call to do something. So I have been in and around voluntary sector work since before I knew myself, really. I ran my first charity at 18. So that's 2 or 3 years ago. So 25 years later, I kind of stood back from running the Runnymede Trust, went to work at the BBC, and I think at that point was just, I really need to work with other Black queer men to take some control of our destinies, and to do what Essex mentions in that poem, to be there for whatever, whenever. Yeah, there's a tall order, absolutely, but at the same time, not having any civil society infrastructure that we can rely on, not having any institutions, not owning anything. You couldn't say there's a bar or a club or a space that was Black and queer and would stay Black and queer. We just felt it's time that we thought about how to create that space, be there for each other. So 2018, I started working on this kind of full time, not expecting a pandemic. I mean, who did? And I think I've been just trying to do things that make sense for the people that come forward and ask for help. So we do what I call making space, and that involves things like Black Medic Brunch, which is a monthly event, kind of extravaganza, really, where we start off with brunch, move on to invite a panel of speakers. We do workshops, we make art, we do crochet, we do whatever kind of comes to mind, and worked on building a momentum around how we support each other around our mental health. I finished it off with a few drinks and karaoke.
Oh God, that sounds amazing.
and just one kind of moment a month where we can sort of say, this is our space.
Yeah,
so it's become important. And then that's developing now into trying to create a physical space. But I'm really quite, I'm in the middle of fundraising for, but also kind of quite infused about this notion of building a digital hybrid space in the centre of London that can be a beacon for Black communities rather than a centre. So trying to make physical some of these ideas. We'll see if it works or not. But I'm really excited by the experiment.
And is there a way that people can support that?
Yeah, so on our website there's an invitation to Clubland, as I'm calling it, with the 400 gentlemen's clubs that used to be in the centre of London. We want to revolutionise those and think about what they might look like in the future. And whether we're gentlemen or not, I'm not sure. But Yeah, so yeah, people should have a look on our site, and that invitation is to anybody who's interested to think about how we might build a digital hybrid space for communities that don't have a neighbourhood.
That sounds amazing. I was really struck by what you said about finding a space that's Black and queer, but also stays that way. And yeah, that need for sort of consistency and stability, I guess.
And I think partly because there's a way in which we're always brand new.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people who, when they come out, that's a really personal step. But also a step which says, I didn't expect this to be. I didn't have to make any plans to become more marginal by becoming myself. So we're learning, but then to come out into a space where there isn't anything, you're being free fall. So we have this kind of concept where there oughtn't need to be any process of coming out, but there is. We are where we are.
Yeah.
And if you are going to come out, better to come out into a community that can say, welcome, this is our experience, rather than have to be brand new.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've been we were talking just before this about or starting to talk about innovation and how there's often such pressure within the funding support that you can get for this work to be innovative. It's always about the new, I guess, and that can be really challenging if you're trying to provide something that's about consistency and really just doing the same thing. And I wonder how we can, whether there are more arguments to be made about that, about how we can kind of shift away from always having to be new and shiny.
I think the thing about, the work will often be new to, the same work will be new to new people, and that in some ways is innovation in itself.
Yeah.
Very rarely recognised.
Yeah.
But may well be derivative. I spend a lot of time learning from our sisters and Black lesbians who've done a huge amount more in terms of organising than Black men have. So what you may do may well not be new. Okay?
Yeah.
It may be having learned from other people's experience. But is that attractive to funders? Sometimes not.
It's it's like a conflation of novelty with need, which is not. It's an odd thing. Really,
and the moments when you are new, when you are the talk of the town, when Moonlight wins an Oscar, and suddenly everyone's black queer men, great. 3-5 years later, we all see Moonlight, so it's on Channel 4 all the time.
Yeah.
What's new? Well, nothing really, but actually, our experience is still valid.
Yeah, and all the difficulties associated with the marginalisation is not, that wasn't solved by the one film. It was interesting though what you said about learning from your sisters, and the quotes on your site are just so amazing. I was thinking about that Audre Lorde quote about facing the realities of our lives as the motivation for action, and that it feels like that sort of storytelling is quite important to what Blackout is also doing.
We definitely started as a website, really. The idea was to become a kind of magazine, give a platform to speak to each other, actually. So there was a way in which there was an increasing amount of work going on, which was about articulating a Black queer life to a broader audience. So we spoke to broader Black communities, we spoke to broader LGBTQ communities, we spoke beyond them to the wider society,
Mm.
and never had a space to speak to each other.
Mm.
So there was just that kind of moment where we were like, look, I'm going through this experience, and I'd rather have a conversation with my peers about it than have to go through the one show to speak to other Black queer men. Still, I mean, the one show I'm sure is a great platform, but it shouldn't be our only one.
No, and yeah, that peer support obviously is sort of crucial, isn't it, for like understanding where, I guess, where you sit in relation to everything else. And I was interested in what you were saying about storytelling, going back to the sort of telling of stories a bit, though, that it's partly about the means of telling them as well. So I guess it chimed with me at the moment because I'm thinking about how we trying to exist as organizations in a context where the pressures to develop there are sort of pressures to develop in certain ways as an organization, to grow, to innovate, all these things. And how do you resist that, or try and build organizations that sort of keep connected to their values in some way? And on the site, there's a really great quote from one of your blogs. You said, achieving viable means of telling and distributing Black queer stories will require finding new incentive structures and forms beyond the mainstream. And that might mean eschewing I can't actually pronounce eschewing, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but the pursuit of mass audiences in favor of a focus on reaching the right audience for the message, which I guess is connected to what you were just saying.
And it's my long-winded way of referring to what Grace Lee Boggs says, like that idea of critical connections rather than critical mass.
Yeah.
How do we have the right conversations with the right people, the ones that are right for now, rather than trying to operate through this kind of mass model. And I think I suppose my experience at the BBC was a real driver for this, where you could see the whole commissioning process was driven by how do you reach the median of an audience. And I think that's a noble aim, but it always left Black queer men on the edge.
Yeah.
And we're not on the edge in our own lives.
No.
We're only on the edge in this kind of mainstream society concept. And it was, I suppose, juxtaposed with a kind of existential problem for the BBC, which was social media. And now speak directly to each other. They can create audiences of their own. So how does mass media work in a period when media can be very interpersonal, which is a concept. The reality of living it is that we want to be able to produce good quality work that speaks to our experience, but has at its centre an audience which is like us.
Yeah.
And that's not separatist. Or the accusation that it's separatist is problematic. Right? So just because we won't get 3 million people in the audience doesn't mean quality should be lower, doesn't mean that the insights to be gained from it should be somehow minimized. And there's something really, really important in generating an audience, generating a conversation and an engagement with ideas at your best. It doesn't necessarily mean you need a Hollywood budget or require an audience size to be its validation. So many important things in what you said. That's really interesting, thinking about that being able to have conversations when you're at your best and what it takes to create that space, and then of course everybody else benefits from that
because yeah, you can't, the minute you compromise that, you are reducing what can come out of that conversation.
Yeah, and I suppose that I guess ties into this this ongoing drive to want to create tribes in some ways, want to create. I suppose I'm struck by the way in which movements work. So you find people that might become fellow travelers, and you have a conversation, and you build something, and that ultimately potentially has a big impact beyond that group, but actually has meaningful for that group at that time. And instead we kind of skip that because there's no money in that, there's no interest in that, there's no way of making that be viable for someone's life. So what you do is you speak over their heads. So we worry about getting a column in the garden.
Yeah.
You can buy a mail online, quite help us. Rather than having a space where you can say, actually, this is how this feels to me, and this is how we can comment on the way the things happening around us.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And exactly that thing of like networks and the spreading of ideas happening in a sort of horizontal way rather than, well, you put it really well, sort of trying to go over people's heads. And it does feel like that is a bit of a thing in the cultural sector. I don't know if it's maybe it's a more broad societal thing, just that there's an expectation because I'm a musician by background, and there's always an expectation that you just like, you're going to go from nobody having heard anything you've ever done to it being, I actually can't think of what forum it could possibly be on because there's so few for live music now. Like, I don't know, Jules Holland. And but why that pressure to do that? Because most people are going to get nowhere near that, but that's fine.
Why is that the only model of success?
Exactly.
So it's been really fascinating to look at the kind of post George Floyd moment where publishing suddenly turns. I mean, I was really lucky. I was working with Rainy Edo-Lodge and her work on. Wow. She was interning at Runnymede when we were kind of talking through some of these concepts, and she must have just got so frustrated with that work that she got to the point of writing her bestseller, which is brilliant. But that moment where suddenly publishing says, "Oh, we want Black writers, we want Black authors to come in and explain this to our audience." Again, skip that step of actually, where does Rennie have that moment to speak to other Black people?
Yeah.
And is there a movement that develops out of that, or is this just to sell books in airports, to sell books to a mass audience, when actually there's a potential for a movement that might sustain some of those arguments and lead to social change rather than profits for Henry.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it's so easy to assume that when people have attained a certain level of success that's all somehow behind it, but of course it's not necessarily. It
doesn't need to be. And in fact, because there is so little infrastructure behind, we're given these. It's hard. This isn't a comment on many at all. This is a comment on publishing, I guess. But we're given these stars, and then as Black History Month goes on, the people that you can get an audience for are also these people that are given to us by the gatekeepers through publishing, and that feels that feels
kind
problematic.
Movement around the stuff that matters. Yeah, that's really helpful to think about that. Well, while we're on Black History Month, I mean, how because you said at the beginning you found it really a useful moment to sort of take stock, and how, just say more about that if you'd like to.
Yeah, so I guess we've used History Months generally as ways into opening a discussion with people. So it's Black History Month. I'm often find myself talking about the erasure of Black queer people from Black history. So we're approaching 100 years from the Harlem Renaissance. 100 years since Claude McKay was the first Black journalist. He's also a bisexual man, but that very rarely gets talked about. So it's the first Black journalist in the UK. Alan Locke and Langston Hughes and Richard Bruce Nugent and Zora Neale Hurston. The Harlem Renaissance was a Black queer movement, not really acknowledged. Windrush arriving was welcomed by a Black queer man, the only Black person to work in the Foreign and Colonial Office at the time.
Wow.
Ivor Cummings, who features on my chest currently, and the first, the West Indian jazz orchestra that was led by a Black queer man who ends up dying in the Blitz in the Café de Paris. These are all kind of stories that ought to be central to understanding Black British, but are ignored in some ways or suppressed out of some kind of sense of respectability.
Yeah.
So Black History Month gives us a good opportunity to raise those issues.
Yeah.
And similarly, in LGBT month, in a similar way, we can start to talk about house music being a Black queer convention, and how that has become a kind of the soundtrack of LGBT clubs around the world, starting from Frankie Knuckles playing in Heaven in the 80s. So you kind of it's a way to reinsert a narrative and to engage within that discussion. So it's a really old tradition as well. Black History Month is what Carter Woodson was talking about this 100 years ago or more. So we're talking about kind of what's presented as a novelty. Oh, by the way, it's Black history. Actually, there's been a long movement, and I think 100 years ago, there's some really fascinating moves going on, and I'm really kind of enlivened by them and excited by them about W.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and some discussions even that they were having about Black queer presence and their concerns about Black queer presence. That gives some texture to one that is often missing.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you use the word respectability and
and the joy of being the freedom that I feel Blackout has, because we start by not being respectable. Right? So it was a couple of years ago, the Blackout took over Brixton Market with a night of ballroom. So where in the daytime there's the halal butchers and the Caribbean grocers, up and down that we turned that into a runway and just to conjure with some of these ideas about what is our space and where should we be and how visible we can be. I think any book that we can find to engage community is a good one.
Yeah. And so much of what you do is connected with mental health more broadly, and that the project with Couth and Culture CSE was all about that. Would you say that that was a sort of, I don't know, do you start from the mental health, or is the mental health a bit come from this? It's a silly question in a way, because it's all together.
But it became really evident to me, some of the struggles people were having with their mental health through the work of just trying to convene. So in Brixton Market on a Saturday night, after when we'd taken over this space, how many of the younger part of our audience who attended, I mean, thought this is great, but they want to walk around the block 2 or 3 times before they went in.
Yeah.
Concerned, or they had to arrive in a group of 15 of them.
Yeah.
Where they felt supported. So the context in which they can just be themselves it is a real factor in how they present to their doctors when they're in crisis, or how they reach out for help and support from each other. We called that night a homecoming, just because we wanted to reassert the fact that this is home to where we've always been, at the heart of our communities. And the very notion that there was, before the Brixton riots, a black bar just around the corner from Brixton Market that was run by a black bisexual woman, who was an artist, and was well known as a black queer owned space, opposite possibly the most racist pub in the area. We'll talk about that at the time. See that now that story is very easy to get lost.
Yeah. Because
it's a residential house, and nobody would know. You walk past it, you wouldn't know it was that was a hub of a community. And she also makes it onto my T-shirt. So Pearl Alcott.
Okay. Justin's to someone else. Sorry.
And Justin Passionate, actually, the footballer.
Oh wow.
Last one. So I mean, history is important, and the link to mental health, but the way in which it allows people to find a route, so that they don't have to be brand new.
Yeah.
Well, I'm joining something rather than coming out into nothing, into this kind of freeform.
Yeah. Thanks. That was There's just so many names that I feel I should know and don't, and it's so helpful to hear this. And I think
all of these stories, these are stories that I've had to find.
Yeah.
And they're not easy to find, and it's been a real privilege to take some time to pick 4 names. Right? And I could have picked 20 names. I discover now, but actually, the story of Pearl Alcott, the story of Ivor Cummins, the story of Berto Pasuka and Justin Fashioning are ones that people don't know generally, and it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Is there somewhere people can read more about them on your site then?
Yeah, so I mean, we write about them. I suppose I'm trying with all of them to organise events around them. So Pearl is around homecoming, and we've held the inaugural Berto Pasuka lecture at the National Portrait Gallery in 2018.
Amazing.
And David McCallum gave that lecture, and amazing David, amazing singer and songwriter, who did this. We commissioned him and said, David, you can stick about whatever you like, and he went away and interviewed 20 black women and only used their words back. They turned their words into this amazing kind of lecture set to music that was only written by black women.
Wow.
It's a really powerful kind of reflection. based on the fact that Berkeley has some pictures in the National Portrait Gallery. But again, you wouldn't know that unless you knew some of the stories about Berkeley. So,
it feels like that word you just used, reflection, is kind of, there's something really key about that, and how you build up a picture through all of these reflections within that community.
yeah, well, within and beyond that community, because again, one of the things that I've been very conscious of is not assuming that community exists. So this is a tool in which we might reflect in a way that helps to build community.
Yeah.
Rather than assume that community is there, because I mean the quite unique position of people who might identify as Black Caribbean, for example, is that group is dwindling. I'm not in a I'm not so bound to the demographic category that I want to think about eugenics to increase the numbers or whatever. But historically, through time, but also through mixing, there's a moment in which Caribbean identity makes sense. That didn't make sense before Windrush. Didn't make sense. People came from different islands rather than the Caribbean. And then that Caribbeanness becomes a Black Britishness, and the African, and people directly from the African continent. And the intermixing means that we're changing.
Yeah.
As the LGBT group has changed over time as well. So a greater visibility of trans people, the greater visibility of non-binary lives, again, shifts and mutates that. So to suggest that there is this kind of
fixed community
that we're trying to defend isn't helpful.
No, exactly. So that reflection is more about how you, a kind of openness somehow to movement always, and that image will change and
and yet there's still going to be something in that past that might help us navigate the future. I think when I look back to my work at Runnymede, trying to do work around racial justice kind of much more broadly, these are the kind of insights that would have been really helpful to be able to articulate, right? But actually, defending a notion of Britishness is possible in a way which is progressive and inclusive and not constraining but liberating. And here's the example: Black queer lives from the margins informing the centre. That feels like that would have been a useful insight to have then, rather than stuck in some of those discussions about cohesion and who we should cohere to, and who we should, and what the centre is and how we all relate to a centre, rather than how we take that past and build a better, more exciting future.
That isn't about, that is sort of de-centered in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it's odd that in a country which is so centralised around what happens in a square mile in London, to talk about decentralisation as what could make it a successful nation in the future. So it's been great to see some of the political moves in terms of decentralisation and devolution.
Yeah.
At heart, a kernel of this idea that we could be more by being, by facing up to our realities. And then it's depressing then to see, some of the ways in which it's fallen back into a kind of pattern where we're not able to where politicians want to play certain kinds of games with our notion of the devolution of power, and that drag us back. I mean, I don't think, who would have foreseen that one of the impacts of devolution might be Brexit.
Yeah. I don't even know where to start. I think, but it's interesting. It's really interesting to hear you talk about devolution. I mean, as a concept, that also I find that hopeful in lots of ways in this sort of creative health world, I guess, because, well, partly because there's a lot of inspiring work happening in Wales, for example, where the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act has fostered this obligation for public bodies to work together. So there's a political imperative for the NHS Confederation and the Arts Council to have a conversation, and that has made such a difference. And the relationships that people are sort of patiently forming between those organisations, and in some way, I think that sort of, we're learning a lot from that movement there. And if we can then persuade Whitehall to move in that direction, that would be something. But I mean,
it's been one of the interesting kind of influences at Brand Foundation. We'll be talking about how we bring people together, and the role of foundations in facilitating people, working in partnerships. That vision of that vision that the silos aren't going to help us. That at the centre of the work should be its beneficiaries.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of beneficiaries feels a bit kind of antiquated.
I know. But the people are at the centre, right?
But the people, and that we can trust people.
Yes.
We can trust people to be progressive rather than
regressive. Exactly.
The worst at all times.
So much of it, I think, is about trust and trust and relationships, and also something about acknowledging our own limitations and sort of being able to go, we can't actually operate on this scale successfully. Again, going back to the kind of growth thing, and your point about centralization, it isn't really possible. We have to find ways of sharing responsibility for stuff, and spreading that a bit, and then that allows for that maybe for more space for difference and for multitudes of voices to kind of inform how we all move together, rather than
to give up control.
Yeah.
Power grows by giving it away rather than hoarding it. Then how are we sharing? How are we giving? And so I suppose that's an admiration that I have for like you run alliances, because that's what at heart of the work is giving rather than seeking to control. And similarly, trying to build community, but not trying to own everything in the community. Particularly in a context in which funding goes to those people who can say, I can reach parts other people can't reach, I can see stuff other people can't do. Well, actually, I can't. I can convene, and I can encourage people to meet and think together. The choices that they make will be the choices that they make, and I think that ought to be okay.
Yeah.